And I think that's what I would tell most people. If they really want to know the secret to success, it's pretty simple. It's WORK. And while you're working, make sure you're growing you. And the harder you work, the luckier you'll get. And you also will run into more growth spurts where you can grow into more of the person that you were meant to be.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Don Long, who's going to share how to tap into your greatness. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote is from Seth Godin. Drip by drip, day by day. It's not dramatic, but that's how we get there. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because you already have everything you need to take that next step. Last week's action step was to start reading a book. I love to read. I usually get through 4 to 8 books per month. So much knowledge and wisdom, and then I get to share it with all of you. Authors spend on average 3 years writing their book, and you get all that valuable information most often for less than $20 and a little bit of your time. One of my favorite books is Living Forward, a proven plan to stop drifting and get the life you want. When you find your purpose and what brings you joy, life gets to be fun. Every minute may not be perfect, but it's through these struggles that we grow. That is what we are going to talk about today. Too often, we're living someone else's dreams, and that's never going to be fun, because it's not what you were designed for. Over the past 3 decades, Don Long has founded 6 different companies to total over $100 million in lifetime revenue. The last company he built went on to the top 1,000 companies in the U.S. in his particular industry. He's the author of 2 books, as well as 3 courses, and he actively engages in coaching and consulting with executives and their teams, speakers, and entrepreneurs from all walks of life, uncovering their identity, facilitating wealth creation, and in the process, increasing their impact to change the world for good. He's been married to his lovely wife, Cindy, for 38 years and has 2 beautiful daughters. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to Richer Soul, Don Long. It's great to have you join us today.
I appreciate it, Rocky. It's really good to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, I would say the school had very little teaching on finances, the education when I was in high school and lower grades. But my family, I come from a background where I'm the fifth generation business owner in our family, and most of my growing up was on a family farm. And my family also built highways for a living. So from the time I was, I don't know, as young as I can remember, there was always work on the schedule. And I learned that work that you did either on the farm or in the projects that my family had going on was how I was going to earn my money. And if I didn't work, well, I didn't earn any money. So they made that pretty clear when I was young. And it was really a good lesson for me because I realized that you've probably heard the saying, you've got to learn how to work hard before you can actually learn how to work smart. And I would say probably the first, decade to 2 decades of my life from the time I was old enough to work, I really learned a lot of different skill sets of how to work hard. And then fortunately, we started 2 or 3 businesses, and one of them, well, actually a couple of them took off into pretty large companies. And, then you just follow the path of the way they take you and the area they take you. But my dad was probably the leading person who taught me the most about finances, money, how to hold on to it, and how to make it.
How old were you when you started working on the farm?
Probably when I could actually do something that actually wasn't in someone's way. They always included the children, but I was probably 10 or 11 years old when I actually could produce something that they didn't have to hold my hand to do. So somewhere in that age range.
And that's relatively young. It's I think in these days, the kids don't get a chance to work, and unless you're doing online sales, there's probably less opportunity than there used to be for them, unless you happen to have a farm or a business of your own. But I think it's good because it teaches that work ethic.
2 of the things that I taught my daughters growing up from the time they were probably old enough to even understand the statement was that if you're not diligent or faithful in the little things in your life, whether that be making your bed or whether that be, doing your coursework at school, then you won't be rewarded with a lot because nobody's going to give you a chance to have a lot. And then the second part of that process was that to whom much is given, much is always required. And that if you're going to have problems in life, and you get to determine which set of problems they are. There's problems with being poor, and there's also problems that come with great wealth. And you get to choose. And I chose the path of not wanting to be poor. So I don't know if there's issues with abundance as well as there is with lack thereof. So,
and that's true. And most people don't realize that there are issues with wealth. Everything comes with its own set of problems, right? And its own set of expectations and work. And you have to decide what trade-off is best for what you want out of life.
There's a proverb that says, it's in actual Proverbs, says desire realized is like a tree of life. And what I realized is desire and dreams inside of you that a lot of times people haven't recognized, but are usually innate to you, actually is what you were built and made for. And if you can find that path, then life is a lot better for you because you'll actually end up unpacking what you were created to do. And that's kind of been my journey over the last 35 years in building businesses and companies, and what led me to where I'm at now and writing books and trying to help other business owners and entrepreneurs is that I found that I had a gift to help bring transformation into people's lives through teaching and training and a lot of different skill sets over building 6 different companies. But what I really like the most is building people. And I realized that I keep every time I would talk to people, I would use the word building. And then I realized my family for 5 generations has either built buildings or roads. So I guess it's kind of in my DNA to build things.
And that's interesting. So I'm going to take a little step back. You said your dad taught you how to make money and hold on to it. What were the key principles there?
Well, the number one is never spend more than you have. And that's one that we could use some lessons on in most people's lives today, is that, my grandparents and my parents had a saying on the farm that don't live above your means. And to create, you have the podcast. It's really about mindset, that in order to grow your wealth, you have to grow your mindset. So it's kind of they're both connected. Without growing you're not going to grow wealth typically. And so there is a kind of a contradiction a little bit in the way I was taught on the farm, because my family was probably, middle class, upper middle at best, but they always owned their own businesses. So they had a little bit different, when you own a company, you have a little bit of different leverage than you do if you don't, although you're responsible for all of it as well. But so from that perspective, that I learned that, hey, if I put the effort in, I can create wealth. But the part that I learned from him and from my family was that you want to have a little bit left over all the time so that you can have some for a rainy day. And I watched that in action through his lifestyle in livestock, buying livestock, selling it, doing different things in business and stuff like that. And so it kind of left a mark on me to, even though as I've grown, and now what used to be hundreds of thousands of dollars is now millions in business, I've grown. So it's not really any different. I just treat it the same way. I manage it and make sure there's some left over, and that, manage it well. And I think that's really a point that most people in business don't get, is that you can create a lot of revenue. There's only two rules in business as far as to define success. It's the revenue you turn over and the profit you keep. Those are the only two rules in business. And if you don't do well in both of those, you're not going to have a company. And so, but what I realized is, you've probably been there as well as many of the people listening to this. You can create $2 or $3 or $4 or $10 million in revenue and still be broke. You're just broke at a higher level, And so one of my early mentors in the early 80s is a guy named Bill Britt. And when I heard him say that, I had already had that drilled into me from my dad and from growing up on a farm. But then this guy was a lot larger in life than my family, very wealthy. And it made a lot of sense. And so as I've grown and I think that's what I would tell most people. If they really want to know the secret to success, it's pretty simple. It's WORK. And while you're working, make sure you're growing you. And the harder you work, the luckier you'll get. And you also will run into more growth spurts where you can grow into more of the person that you were meant to be.
And that's so true. And, it's such a simple principle of spend less than you earn. And yet, doing that simple seems to be very hard for the majority of people. And it's true with business owners. We have a saying that top line is vanity, bottom line is sanity, and cash flow is reality.
That's so true. That's good.
Most business owners are only focused on the top line. They don't realize that if you don't focus on the bottom line, you can grow your way to struggling, and people don't always realize that. You mentioned that there are problems with wealth. What are some of the biggest problems you see with wealth?
The biggest challenge is, most of your listeners and you are probably familiar with John Maxwell. He's wrote a lot of successful leadership books. He makes a statement that money is only good for one thing, and that's to give you options. And I think that's kind of how I've lived my life. And the problem with that is that the prosperity of a fool will destroy them. And what that entails is you get things without growing personally. And so the wealth itself can actually it actually gives you options to do things that you wouldn't have if you didn't have the money. And sometimes if you don't grow yourself personally enough to be founded in your own principles and your own beliefs, so that when you go from zero to whatever the number is. I don't have a number. When I train and teach people that I coach, the first question I ask them is to come up with a number in their mind of, if they had that much money, then their life would be set. And then they come up with that number, whether it's $1 million, 10 million, 1 million, 500,000, it doesn't matter. People come up with their own numbers. And the first thing I want them to understand is that's your top line. That's as far as you're ever going to go, because you set the limit. And it surprises them when I say that, but it's about you growing into more. See, I kind of have this thought process that there's always more. But the more you get, if you don't stay founded in your beliefs and principles, the more you get, then it will destroy your life. There is a major warning, and some of your listeners might be familiar with Proverbs or stuff in the book of Proverbs. There's a lot of warnings when it comes to wealth, but there's also a lot of blessings that come with it too. So I think that I think you mentioned in your last podcast with the investment guy that invests in real estate, that money just magnifies who you are, whether it be good or bad. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
And that's true. And it's also why most lottery winners and people who inherit money tend to be broke in a worse place than they were before they got the money, because they haven't grown as people. They were handed money, but they didn't learn the lessons that go along with it. They didn't grow, essentially, which is unfortunate.
Absolutely.
So you talked about transformation. And I think this is one of the most difficult things for people to do. How do you help people, and what is the key for us to transform ourselves?
Well, that's a good question. Typically, what I work on is identity. And I usually go a different path when I consult people individually. I've got a pro athlete that I work with who's in his 30s. He's now no longer a pro athlete. He's doing other things. But one of the things that I did with him is just point him to the greatness and the things that already burn inside of him. See, I'm a big believer that in order to have transformation, that actually all you need is already inside of you now. And it's aligned with your desires, your dreams, and then your identity, kind of in that package. And that's where I always start if I get the chance. If I do some corporate trainings at a higher level, more of a, teams of people, and I'm not able to drill down as much. But when I work with individuals, what I attempt to do is find out what turns them on and what they burn for. Because whatever turns them on and what they burn for points to, number one, who they are, which speaks to identity. Well, within that identity piece, you have all you already need if you can unpack it and uncover it. And through that process of working that process out, actually you become transformed. You were a caterpillar. You are now a butterfly. And this is an ongoing process. Obviously, you never quite arrive. You might arrive to a different level than you were, but then there's another level that reveals itself. And that's the way I like to look at it. I used to look at it like, and a lot of young business owners do, like once I get to X, whatever X is, that represents Nirvanaville. The problem is Nirvanaville doesn't exist. And it only exists momentarily. And most of life is lived in the valley floor. I don't know if you enjoy a nice glass of wine or not, but I enjoy a cab, which is the red wines. And I've been to Napa several times. And one of my last trips there, they had this 3D map that was laid out on like a playboard, like you would see at a high school project. And it showed the heights and the valleys. And what was interesting was all the big fruit forward wines and the localities of those were all in the valley floor. None of them were on the sides of the mountains. And what I realized is that all of your richest experiences is always in the valley floor, because that's where the soul's richest. And I use the 80-20 rule. About 80% of your life is going to be lived in the valley floor, and about 20% of it, you're going to have some mountaintop experiences. And unfortunately, when they come, a lot of times we're looking as younger business owners like that's where we should be looking for. Hey, you should have goals. I agree with that. But realize that working out the process of you becoming is where all the transformation's at. Without that piece taking place, you don't experience transformation.
And it's very true. Your growth occurs not on the top of the mountain, but in the bottom of the valley. And it's the struggle that makes us stronger. And I think we just need to shift our mindset around that in understanding that that is the case. And it's, I think even with fruit that's stressed actually tastes sweeter than fruit that is given everything it needs. And we are probably not much different than that. So we also need to face the stress, which brings up the issue. For a lot of people, being on the Valley floor is a grind. So how do you look at that and enjoy it?
Well, what I try to get people to understand, either use, it depends on if people like to work out or not. I work out with a bunch of crazy CrossFit guys, and I'm almost 60. I'm 59, so all of them are younger than me. So I have to re-gauge what's possible for my age group. But the thing that I realize is that the stronger you get, in order to get stronger, much like you just used the fruit analogy in the soul, that you have a breakthrough moment in your muscle, and it actually tears. And when that tear takes place, it actually hurts. That's what causes soreness, and that's what causes the pain in your body. But all that's an indication of is weakness leaving and strength coming. And so what I try to, when I'm talking to people in business terms, is the valley floor. There are some deep holes in the valley floor. I don't want people to think that there's not. But for me, the valley floor represents where most of your life is lived. And it's not always hard. It's not always super stressful, although there's a certain amount of stress there because you're growing. You'll have weeks and seasons where, you're not pressured as much, even in business. Business usually has cycles. And the last company that I ran, we would have our successful years. We would have 9 really hot months, and then we'd hopefully have 3 months that were downtime so we could regroup. Some years you'd have 12 hot months and there was no breathing room. And then there were years where you struggled to get 6 or 7 good hot months. And then, the cycle, it always is different. But in the process of being in the valley, I try to get people to look at it differently. And I try to use the fruit analogy that you just used, and also the strength analogy, is that the valley is not a bad place to be because the majority of your life is lived there. Just get used to it. And it's a place of growth and contribution. Learning how to grow and contribute when you're under a certain amount of stress, whether that's a large amount or whether it's a small amount, develops you. And it speaks to the end result of the transformational process, because without that process, you don't really get tested to see who you are, because all a test does is reveal who you are and who you're not, or what you know and what you don't know. And when that appears to a business owner, it's bad. It's either good for your profit or bad for it. If a test shows up and you're not ready for it in business, usually get your clock clean. And that means either a diminished revenue or diminished profits. Now, on the other hand, if the test shows up and you not only pass it, but dunk it, so to speak, then obviously your revenue goes up and the profits go up. But you should look at it like, and I try to get people to look at it from a different mindset. This is not here to kill me. This is here to empower me. And you've got to start looking at it from an empowering lens, because that's the only way you will extract strength from it at the end of it.
So it's a mindset shift.
Absolutely.
What can I learn from this experience, and what is this going to teach me? And every experience, good and whether you label it good or bad, will teach you something, and it's up to us to pay attention and to understand the lessons. Now, I know a lot of people struggle with clarity of who they are and what they are designed for, and they even struggle to figure out what those special skills are that they have. Do you have advice on, if someone wants to figure that out for themselves, like, what are they designed for? How do they go about doing that?
Well, one of the things I think your last guest that you had on, to learn your lessons in life when you're in your 20s so you can figure out what you want to do when you get older, I think was the comment, but it was just so much truth in that. But what I do in my process, I have a process in the Blueprint of God that I use with individuals. And the first place I always start is desire and what they burn for. Because most people can tell you they can tell you their dreams, or maybe sometimes their fantasies, and they think they're dreams, but we work through that process. But most people can tell you what they desire or what they burn for or what they see their life being, hopefully, in their mind's eye. And they can articulate the dreams they have, whether they be monetarily or spiritual or whatever. They can typically come up with a few. And the second part I do, which is so easy, it's so simple, is I use the DISC profile, which is a personality profile assessment test. And I use it with I used to use it in the companies I ran, but I use it for all of my clients. And what that assessment test does, if you just go take a version of it, this is something your listeners could go do today. Just go online, buy the simple test. It's $20 or $30 and take it. What that does is that gives you a list of strengths and it gives you a list of weaknesses immediately. And when you read your strengths and when you read your weaknesses, what you'll find is sometimes people don't believe them. So my advice to them would be go ask your wife or your children. They'll be able to tell you that they're true, but whether you like it or not, because they know you better than anybody. But take the strengths. I always teach my clients, take the strengths, and out of those strengths, you're going to already know what your weaknesses are, by the way. When you read them, you're going to say, yeah, I do. That's true. But the strengths is what you want to focus on, because what you focus on, you get more of. So what you want to do is take out of those strengths, there's usually 8 or 10, the top 3 that stick out to you when you read the list, that you're like, wow, that's true. Highlight those with a highlighter. Put them on a 3x5 card. Stick them in your car, on the dash of your car, on the refrigerator, if your wife will let you, and then in your bathroom on the mirror. And every time you see that card, ask the question, what gifts and talents and abilities are these strengths attached to? Your strengths are natural extensions of your gift and talents. The gifting and the talents you're born with point to what you should do. And so if you can figure out something like, I'm gifted at speaking, so public speaking is going to be part of my life. And how I facilitate that is going to be different than other people. But that would be one thing I could point to for me. And so there's other things too. But what I tell people is, look, you only need 1 or 2 gifts. A lot of people are looking for 10 or 15 gifts. Just stop it. You don't have that many. 1 or 2 that are worked on will make you so super successful that it would blow your mind if you just work on what you were given from the Creator. And so once people find their strengths, they can find their gifting. And the gifting, then you start asking, once you start realizing, wow, I'm good at putting Legos together. When I was young, when I put Legos together, it looked like a monster, so to speak, or nothing. If you're good when you sit down and you put Legos together when you were a kid, and it looked like the Empire State Building when you got done, what does that speak to? It might speak to being an architect. It might speak to being an artist. It could speak to being an engineer. And so I just kind of naturally, there's things in your life right now that you do, and this is the catchphrase that you listen for. There's things right now, Rocky, that you do that people say, wow, when you do that, it looks so easy. Pay attention to what those things are, because those things point to your gifts. They point to your natural innate ability given to you by the Creator and put in your DNA before you were born. And what happens if you can find those, there's always some action or activity, or we would call it employment, that you can take in fields that line up with those. And it might not be in the beginning the exact thing you want, but if you apply yourself and learn something, like you said previously, learn the lessons when you're in your 20s, learn and grow at someone else's expense, so to speak. Look at it this way. When you get employment, if you want to be self-employed, when you get your first job of working for someone else, treat it like it's yours. Treat it like it's owners. Treat it like you're an owner and work at your butt off there and learn and grow, because whatever you do there will translate into your bigger goal and dream down the road.
So true. And I think a lot of people struggle to figure out what it is they're good at. For some people, it's crystal clear, right? But for a lot of people, I don't think it's as self-evident. And so that creates doubt. And when you have doubt, then you don't have that fire to keep going forward. And so you need to to take the time to figure it out. Because as you've said, we all have our unique talents. I think a lot of times it's realizing what those talents are and then understanding the value that they have in the marketplace, because that is truly where wealth becomes, is when you've got talents that are highly valued. And I think we all have them. It's not always easy to figure out that intersection. Is that something you do for people, is helping them figure out the intersection?
Absolutely. Well, it's yeah. So the next step in the process of once you find your gifts and talents and abilities, what you will find is they're innate to you, and then it ties to your identity. It actually ties to that, and then there's also work that's what I call workmanship, which is basically work that you were created for. And look, you might not find it. I'll give you part of my journey, and maybe this will help me explaining some of my journey. When I went into business when I was 25, it was one of the first companies that I owned. I took over the sales because I was decent at sales, and I became pretty good at it over time. Good enough to write a book on it, I guess. But I did that for one of my close friends. That's how the book came about. But anyways, what happened is that we did things within that company that were not really things I enjoyed doing. So it was good. I mean, it wasn't anything wrong with it. It's just like I didn't want to do outside works forever. I didn't want to do, some of the X factors that had to do with the deliverables of the products and services that we were offering. But I started growing as an individual in my skill set in dealing with people, in talking, in communicating, in casting vision. So some of these things that I was actually innately gifted for actually started bubbling up through my actions running or taking on a part of a company that I had to take the sales on and produce. And I was given the reins to do that. And what ended up happening is through that process of work, because the secret is work. That's where you learn everything, is through action. Faith without works is dead. Do not tell me you have faith if you're not going out and doing something, because you don't. And so what happens is through the works, what ends up coming up is your gifting. And so a lot of times people ask the question, and what I do with people is I walk through the 7-step process. I walk through them. By the time I get through the 3rd or 4th step, they'll know what they're gifted to do. Now, whether they can actually take on that position or that job or start that company at that particular time, that's something they have to kind of walk through in their own process of where they're at in life. But it's not, it is, you said it's sometimes difficult for people to see. It is and it isn't. And usually what happens, if people would just go and apply themselves and take on some responsibility at a company or start your own business, whatever that looks like for you. When you start doing that, your natural gifts and talents will come to the surface. And then it's up to you to see those and start developing them. And what I did when I started seeing those, obviously, when you first start a company, you have to do everything, whether you're good at it or not. That's just the way it comes with part of the territory. And so I had to do a lot of things I wasn't good at and I didn't like. And here's another key. The things you hate to do, you're never going to be good at, and they're not your gifts. I didn't say you didn't have to do them in business. I'm just saying you're never going to be able to do it. I noticed your last one of the last people I listened to on your podcast said he loves spreadsheets. I hate spreadsheets. So it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, I ended up having to look at them because I had to look at the P&L every month in 3 different divisions of the last company that I ran. I ran them like 3 different companies. So I looked at them, I studied them, I did it, but it wasn't the highlight of my day. And so what that showed me was I need the things that spoke to me naturally. I love what John Maxwell says. John Maxwell says, once you find out what you're good at or your strengths, never work on your weaknesses another day in your life. And it's so true, because the things you're weak at, you're not gifted for. Now, obviously, running things, if you're responsible for it, you have to do those. There's a caveat to that. But what I found is when people take action and start being faithful with the little things they're giving, whether it's in a company structure or whether it's your own business, you start learning you. And as soon as you learn you, read material, read books, listen to CDs, go online and listen to things, get on podcasts that speak to your gifting and feed that gift, and it will grow. And that's probably the easiest way I can explain it to people.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. You know, it's funny. I love spreadsheets. My entire life runs on them. If there's something that needs to get done, it most likely has a spreadsheet associated with it because it makes sure it gets done. But again, that's kind of my natural skill set. And it was a gift that I was given that I never realized how valuable it was till much, much later in life. And you made another interesting point is we all have our skill sets. Sometimes we want to do other things. When I coach soccer, I would always just watch the kids. They naturally find their place on the field. And if you'll just let them go to where they naturally find themselves, it's much, much easier than trying to put them where you want them. And I think that was probably one of the biggest ahas I had in coaching was just to step back and see what came of it. And it solved a lot of problems, and it made the team much, much better through that. You mentioned a 7-step process. What is the 7-step process that you talked about?
I use desire. I always start with desire. That's the easiest place, and it's not really in any order. It's just the order that's usually the easiest. I start with desire. Then I go to people's strengths, which is really easy to find because you can find your strengths just by simply taking a simple personality profile test. I use the DISC because my mentor and the person who trained me with it, we've developed some systems that are add-ons to that. So I exclusively use the DISC to use that. But you can take any of the tests and they'll give you a list of strengths and weaknesses, typically if it's a good profile test. I go from there and I start working toward gifts and talents. So basically what you have to realize is your gifts and talents are basically extensions of your strengths. So if you know something you're gifted at, then you can follow it back to your strengths, or vice versa. If you know a strength, you can follow it forward to your gifts and talents. So I kind of drill down there. And then the next thing I work on is identity. Because identity to me is everything. It's the core belief, and people describe it differently. In a spiritual sense, the identity is the way the Creator made me, and my certain DNA and my uniqueness in the universe, so to speak. And so if I can get people there, and sometimes these steps are different with each person I work with, because sometimes I'll find out we'll get to people's identity quicker than I will their strengths, for instance. And so we just kind of work the process either backwards or forwards. It doesn't really matter. The fifth thing that I do is it actually feeds in. I call it workmanship, but it's actually, you can use skill set in there. We start looking at skill sets or what they were created for to do as work, because everyone's created to contribute. And the only way you contribute is through work. And entrepreneurs have such a great, you doing this podcast is part of you're contributing to other people and their growth. And so we work on skill sets next. And then we kind of go from there. And what I realized with skill sets, just kind of a side note, is your skill sets, you typically are born innately with some set of street smarts that help you facilitate those skill sets. So we kind of look at those and we drill down on those. And then I look at the kind of the part of pulling all that together. We look at this word beauty. I use the word beauty. I used to tell people that when people brought me answers at the company that I ran, it was beautiful to me. We don't use that term. We would use a term like it solved the problem or it gave me the result I needed. But really, when you look at it, what's beautiful to you? I try to look at it from a lot of different angles because, believe it or not, sometimes I'll start with that. If I've coached a guy that's a world-class musician and he's a lighting guy, he could do lighting shows for Led Zeppelin. He's that good. Well, he was one of my first students because he was a friend of mine for about 8 or 10 years. And so we actually started with skill set and beauty with him because he was more of a left brain type person, more of a creative. And so we started with beauty and kind of worked our way forwards and backwards. And then the final one, really, if you put all those together, they kind of equal one thing. And I talk to people about this. I call it either your slingshot or your superpower. And basically, it's the thing that when you put the kind of the first 6 steps together and you start really being congruent with all those, you end up in your superpower, or that place that you carry presence with. You carry, for lack of better words, an anointing, an authority, an ability that actually delivers above the people around you because you were specifically made for that particular task and that particular timing of running that business. And so that's kind of the 7 steps. And we use those terms are pretty much the ones I use in my book, but I also use some different ones just to try to drill down to where people are based on their spirituality and their gifts and their language as well.
And it's helping people find that path. A lot of times we do need help. Like, it's hard for us to see ourselves. And so sometimes having someone to help you walk through that journey is always helpful, and you will get results faster. So you talked about one of your books, and let's just touch base on it, because I know a lot of people, when you say the word sales, they cringe. But the reality is everything in life, if you want to make things happen, is about sales. Whether it's your kid wanting a Christmas gift, you wanting to marry a spouse or get a job, all of those things, or even getting a raise, all of that comes down to sales. You wrote the book, Sell or Don't Eat. What was the message of that book?
Well, the title came out of working with my publisher. The way the book, little backstory, the way the book actually got started was the first person that I coached. His problem or his issue that he came to me for was he didn't know how to sell. And so we started meeting once a week, and he was local here in the area I live in, so we could meet for coffee instead of meeting, over Zoom or something like that. But we started having conversations, and what happened was it was amazing. In a matter of 6 weeks, he went from having 0 clients to having more business than he could get to, and his whole life and business had been transformed. And he came into the coffee shop one day and he said, "I want you to write a book." I'm like, okay, so we took all the lessons and stuff that basically I did these audio talks right on my iPhone. And I'd send him voice memos over for the best things that I had learned in sales over building 6 different businesses and the things that I thought were the most important. And he listened to those audios and applied the different things that were probably 20 minutes long, 20, 25 minutes long. And I took those audios and created a book called Sell or Don't Eat. And the main message of the book actually is about building relationships. It's actually about the first 2 chapters actually are called The Real You and Authenticity. And I talk a lot more about building rapport and building relationships with people than I do actually selling anything. Because what I realize is everyone's looking for tactics and tools. And unfortunately, if you use the 80-20 rule, only 20% of sales is about tools. 80% of it is the psychology, the relationship factor, the connectivity to your client, the authenticity that you bring to the subject matter of whatever it is that you're trying to get them to buy. And what I realize is if you build relationships with your clients and look at it like that instead of looking at it like sales is so scary to people. But really, if you look at it like I am bringing a answer that will solve a particular problem for my clients, and these are my clients that I think, or these are the clients I think are the best suited for this, and you start going to them with that thought process in mind, then you actually start coming across differently. You actually start coming across as wanting to solve a problem for them, creating win-win. A lot of these terms we use, and people say, well, yeah, I've heard that before. Then what I would tell people that's probably unique in the things that I teach in sales is forget selling anything and just be you. Figure out who you are, and whatever it is that you do, take it into the clients that you're going to see with all you have, being fully alive, and try to build relationships with them. And don't worry about if you don't make the sale, because at the end of the day, when we make it about whether we make the sale or not, we're not actually making about whether I'm developing a long-term relationship. One of the things that I did with the last company I ran, we had 3 different businesses basically run in one company. And I had 3 different profit and loss statements. And one of those particular brands had 500 to 1,000 different companies that we would deal with over about 100-mile geographical location. And these contracts were anywhere from, anywhere from 25 to 100 grand a year. They were small monthly installment contracts. So a lot of times when we didn't get the job with the people in the beginning, we kept them on our list and we kept building relationships with them. And this is the way I taught all of my salespeople, all of my account managers. So I never talked about sales as much as I did, how is that client doing? Are we handling our part of the relationship well? Are we doing what they're expecting us to do and exceeding their expectation? I would always have my meetings with my sales teams and the teams that were there to create the business in those terms. And I tried to do that because I wanted them to be brainwashed, for a lack of better words, with that way of looking at the sales system instead of it being about, I've got to close a deal. And so that's kind of where we wrote the book from, is more from a relationship and authenticity than actually tactics. We do have some tactics in the book, but I kind of blend them in with the other stuff.
And sales is all essentially about solving problems and doing it with somebody that you know, like, and trust. And when you can put those intersections together, then it's not a difficult process. I've always said, if you do the sales process right, there's no need to close, because the client will say, hey, I want to work with you. And so if you're finding yourself having to constantly ask for stuff, it means you haven't hit the core problem and you haven't provided a solution that works. Because if you do that, people are just begging you for it and they want to work with you. And again, all of this comes down to mindsets and understanding the systems and then just going out and implementing.
Absolutely.
So you have your other book, which is God's Blueprint, right?
Yep.
And what is the theme of that book?
It's kind of the theme of the core message in it is built around identity, finding out who you are. And then being able to unpack, I call it kind of falls in the destiny discovery product genre, if you will, of books that you would read. I don't deal with the 7 steps directly. I actually wrote the book, and one of the people I was working with, once I completed the book, is someone who helped me develop the course. That's the Blueprint of God. I have a course out on it that talks about the 7 steps. And actually, if anyone listening to this can go and I have a free, it's a free training on, it's about 24 minutes. If you go to my website, and we can give that at the end, you can click on the free training that talks about the blueprint process. And I go through these 7 steps that you and I just talked about a few minutes ago. And that kind of spun out of, because the lady that helped me develop the course said, wow, you realize you've got a 7-step process. And I'm like, well, I didn't really see that. So it kind of, one of those things, the gifts that the universe gives you, where you do one thing and something else shows up. And so that's kind of how that whole thing is. But I drilled down on the large basis of the book is built around, there's a particular psalm that David wrote, "You're fearfully and wonderfully made." And then the other passage is in Proverbs, where it talks about desire realized is like a tree of life. And the beginning part of that says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick," or without hope, you're sick. And so what I realize is when I can build people's lives, when I get people to the core of them believing that they're fearfully and wonderfully made. Think about it. If you thought you were that, and you thought that you were able to have your desires, and when they manifest, they actually had the fruit on it that was of eternity, or the tree of life, how much more fully alive would you live? And this is kind of the process that I walk out through the book.
And it's not surprising you said something. You had somebody else who worked with you who said, hey, you've got a 7-step process. So often we're so close to whatever we're doing that we don't see the bigger picture. And so sometimes we either need to step back or have someone else kind of out at, looking at the forest when we're stuck looking at the trees and at the ground and the weeds of our life. And that I have found numerous times over is that you have to take different viewpoints, and sometimes it's always hard to do as a person, and that's why having help is tremendous. You're working on a new project now, right? Which is God's Blueprint for Nations. So what's going to be the theme there?
It's kind of it's a little bit of a lot of things in there. I actually started doing research and somewhat of how our country's founded, and the getting us back to what I consider our entrepreneurial roots of the founding, and being able to deal with some of the issues that we've been basically over the last 100 years. Our country's kind of been going the wrong direction. The first chapter is called "Bending the Twig," and it's in alignment with train a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. That word "train" means to bend in Hebrew, and so what's happened over my lifetime, 50 years plus, and then really over the last 100, is that our nation has been being bent in the wrong direction. And so I bring some spiritual principles in there, and some of the quotes. Edmund Burke, who was one of the founding fathers, I quote him a lot in there. I actually quote Lenin and Stalin, which is not positive, but I use them in the book, of how we've kind of ended up where we're at now, and what it's going to take to actually take back our nation, and not necessarily go backwards, but to actually rediscover our foundation and our roots of how we were founded and return to those is kind of the theme of the book. It's a lot more in it than that, but it'd take me be a whole nother 2 or 3 podcasts to really drill down on it.
And that's fine. And I think we are kind of, in a sense, going back to that entrepreneurial way as the gig economy, spins up. And as you see technology just kind of changing everything, everyone has the ability to kind of partake in the marketplace, whether they be a solopreneur, whether they are an employee or not. But I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities for people to create their own path forward. And the ability to collaborate around the world now is so much easier than it's ever been. So there are far, far more opportunities. But you've got to open your eyes and learn to take those chances. And, more and more I'm hearing stories, unfortunately, of people our age who are losing their jobs because, the companies either are losing their marketplace, or they use the bad, or a slump in the economy to just clean house, and they don't do it with common sense. They just do it. And unfortunately, a lot of people get displaced. And so you've got to grow yourself, know your skills, build those relationships so that if something happens to you, you can be resilient and find the next opportunity, regardless of whether you're doing your own business or you are an employee. And so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, that 100%. I think you're going to see it. It's like when we've pretty much, as a country, everything's kind of crazy. And I know that the corona has magnified some of this, but what you find out and what the studies say, and it's actually already happening in Europe, and there's a couple books out there you could read on it. But what we end up doing when things get crazy in our world is three things happen in a nation. We typically go back to our traditions, our roots, and our absolutes. And those are the three things that we have to return to if we want any semblance of sanity in the United States of America, or we're going to continue down the path we're on now. And it's the path we're on now is unsustainable as a nation, with the absolutes and things just being thrown to the side of the eternal foundation that our country was founded on. And so with people being displaced, the reason I bring that up is that the three things that I admonish people to go back to is their traditions, whether it's their family or maybe it's a couple of generations, the roots of their family, the roots of who they are. I come from 5 generations of business owners, and I didn't even realize that until I did a speech at a business event that I helped co-found back in 2017. And when I did the talk, I was impressed by the creator to talk about the 5 generations before me. And I realized that they had all been in business for themselves, and that I stood on their shoulders, so to speak, because of their work ethic and the things that they had. And so that spoke of the roots of my family and traditions. And then finding absolutes that you're going to live by. It doesn't have to be my absolutes. This is what I tell people. You get to define your life. No one else gets to define it. You get to define what things mean. You get to define what spirituality means. You get to define what prosperity means. You get to define whatever it is. And don't let other people define your world. You define it, because if you don't, other people will define it. And so when you create your list of absolutes, they're going to be yours. But what I found is when you live by those, it actually creates a foundation where you're not shaken like the old oak trees down in Charleston, South Carolina. When the storms come through, they whip the tops of them, but they don't move because they're 150, 250, 300 years old. And it's like that's what happens when we go back to finding what our traditions are and what our roots are, and then developing our own absolutes so that we can live a strong life. Because you're right, anything can happen tomorrow and you don't have control over. Look at this year as or 2020 was a good test of you thought you had control over your life, but a little disease came into our country and you found out how little control you had. So it can change quickly, and you've got to stay on top of it to grow yourself and be accountable to your own heart, so to speak.
And that is very true. We always like to leave people with an action step that they can take this week. What is something that people can easily do this week to move forward on what you're suggesting?
Well, one of the things that I can give you is if you don't know your strengths, just go online, take a simple DISC test, make sure that it's a complete assessment. They're usually $20 or $30. Take that just for fun. Even if you've taken one before, take it for fun. Print it out or save it on your computer so that you can go back and look at it and start realizing the strengths. Start meditating on those strengths that stick out to you. And I'll guarantee you, if you just do that one thing alone, you'll start becoming more fully alive, more fully engaged in whatever you're doing and whatever your occupation is. And I think that's something I've taken the DISC test many times, and I've actually went back and taken it again, because it's like sometimes we forget. Socrates says remembering is forget. When we remember, that's when we learn. And it's like, so sometimes you have to go back and remember so you learn again.
And now we do. And it's always good to kind of take that step back and see where you are, just like most professional sports teams, right? Every time a season begins, they go back to basic training, and they start at the beginning and they get the foundations right. And unfortunately in life, I don't think we go back to basic training every so often. And maybe it makes sense once a year or at least once a decade to go back and take some time and say, what's the basic training I need to truly get myself recentered in living the life that I choose to live?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't be afraid investing. The other tip is, if people have recently taken the DISC test, don't be afraid in investing in yourself, whether that's through listening to podcasts, buying books. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on seminars and business stuff and books and back even when they had cassette tapes. It's like to grow as an individual, you have to invest in yourself. So if that's something you haven't been doing, take the time, get a book that speaks to who you are, get a set of teachings that speak to who you are, and listen to them and meditate on them and apply the principles. And hey, you might find something that comes out of you in just a matter of a few days that wasn't coming out of you.
So true. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
I think my main secret that I developed probably about 15 years ago after I had an encounter, so it was a spiritual encounter I talk a little bit about in my book, The Blueprint of God, is that there's always more. And I wake up every day, and if I get frustrated, that's the first thing I try to remember. Wait a minute, there's always more. There's always more life. There's always more wealth. There's always more to learn. There's always more to grow into. And that helps me stay in that state where I'm attracting the things that I want instead of the things that I don't want.
It's a journey, and it's a never-ending journey. And you said it earlier in the podcast, when you hit one level, a door opens up, kind of shows you the next level and the next opportunity. And I think we have to keep waiting for the next door.
Absolutely.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
There's a lot of things I wish I had learned. I think the value of time and, how fast it goes by. And, I've just sold the last business that I helped co-found and back in the 80s. And I just sold it in 2019 and end of 18. And 35 years of running that business and other businesses, but how fast it went by. And how I don't think, raising two daughters, they're both grown now in their early 20s, but I tried to value the time of being a parent, but I think I would have extracted more enjoyment out of all the little tidbits of things that I probably walked over and missed.
And that is so true. I think that was Sam Walton's dying message is, he looked around at his grandkids and realized he missed his kids and his grandkids while he was building his empire. And you've got to have balance with that. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be? I
would tell them to really drill down, do whatever you have to do to find out what your true desires are, not what's been superimposed. A lot of times we dream of things because our parents said you're going to be a doctor, or you're going to be a lawyer, or you're going to be this, or you're going to be Tiger Woods or whatever. And there's other people's and well-meaning and really good parents have superimposed their desires. What I found with most of the people I coach is the majority of the first desires I get are other people's and not theirs. And so what I would really say is, look, find what you burn for. The younger you can find out, if you're 18 and you can find what you burn for, boy, you're going to have a whole lot more life. You still have to work the process out, but you'll be living out your best life, not kind of muddling through. The first 20 years in business, I muddled through removing the self-imposed dreams of others off of me before I got to mine, and it took me that long.
And it does. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's why people, I think, aren't thrilled with their lives, because they're not living their lives. They're living a life that was told to them, or they accidentally fell into because of a parent, a teacher, or a job opportunity, instead of actually taking the time to say, what is it that I truly want? And then going after it.
So good.
If people would like to find you, connect, find that course, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just best way is you can either email me at coaching@donwlong.com. That's coaching@donwlong.com. Or you can just go to my website, donwlong.com, and it's got all my stuff on there. It's got the different courses, my books. There are, I think, a couple free things on there that you can get. I know there's one on the 7-part teaching that I do on desire. I think it's called The Blueprint, and it's about 24 minutes long. It's really good. It'd help people a lot to just pick that up. It is completely free, so avail yourself to it. And if you would like to contact me or speak to me further, then you can use either one of those places to reach out.
And I will put them in the show notes so that it's easy for people to find them. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
I want to share the secret to life. Work hard and take calculated risks. I really enjoyed the conversation with Don. I hope you did as well. The next decade is going to bring a lot of change as technology evolves and the world changes rapidly. We have to change with it. I'm finally at the point of my life where I do what I love that's in line with my talents. It took me a long time to figure that out. I could have done so much more, but it would have come at a cost, which was family time. So I'm thrilled to have waited and to have harmony in my life. Do you know what you want from life? If Don can help, reach out to him. Also, remember Mark Delaney? He was on a past episode. He helps people to find their purpose in weeks, not months. Invest in yourself and take that next step. This week's action step was the DISC profile and to figure out your strengths. So take the test, figure out your strengths. We all need help sometimes seeing what our strengths are. And the DISC profile, along with others, can help you figure it out. When you find alignment with what you are meant to do, life becomes magical. Did you hear how Don mentioned he has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on self-improvement? I also have spent a lot on it as well. Education doesn't stop at college, and taking the time to grow and improve is worth the investment. If you enjoyed today's episode, would you do me a favor and share it? And also, one of the things that has been coming up is when I'm looking to get some really great guests on, they're looking at the reviews for the show and the number of reviews. So if you take a second and on iTunes, just leave a quick review or even just a rating, that would be awesome. And I would appreciate it. Thank you so much. Next week, we have Tracy Lalonde, the Joy Achiever Journey. She's going to talk about evading burnout, surpassing your goals, and out happy everyone else. That sounds really cool. Looking forward to it. In the meantime, have an abundant week.